Your computer is the center of your music creation, so you need to make sure you have the right one. In this video, I'm going to take you through the computer requirements for music production, including the minimum specs you should be looking at. I'm also going to help you understand what each part of the computer does when it comes to music production. Before we get started, for any budding film, TV, game, or media composers out there, don't forget you can download my 40-page ebook, The Media Scoring Guide, for free by visiting soundtrack.academy/ebook. I'll include a link in the description. So, why is it important to get the right computer specs? Put simply, it's going to speed up your workflow, make your life a lot easier, and even help prevent you from losing unsaved work, like if a project freezes as you're working on it. When running music production software on low-spec computers, you'll find that when recording, you'll need a much higher buffer size to prevent your DAW from crashing, which is going to create a whole load of recording lag. Not ideal. When running sample libraries or plugins, your DAW will keep crashing, and you'll find yourself having to either limit the amount of plugins or instruments you're using, or to bounce tracks down to audio as you're creating your music. Obviously, that's not ideal, particularly if you need to make edits or conforms like we have to do so often in soundtrack music. Full disclosure, I'm a musician and composer/producer more than I am a tech expert, but knowing about computers kind of goes hand in hand with being a composer nowadays. That said, I'm sure you proper techies might find that I describe things in a less than perfect manner, but this is how I've come to understand this stuff, and more importantly, how I feel it applies to machines built for music. There's a few decisions you'll need to make straight away: the type of computer you'll need, your budget, and whether you want to run a Mac or Windows machine. First things first, you want to decide what type of computer you'll need, whether that's a desktop tower like a traditional PC tower, a laptop, an all-in-one like an iMac, or even a mini-style computer like the Mac Mini. In the Windows realm, desktops tend to be the preferred type of computer for music producers, as they're cheaper and more customizable than the laptop all-in-one or mini counterparts of similar specifications. The story's slightly different for Macs, where there's generally less customization or self-builds, and all-in-ones or minis like the iMac and Mac Mini respectively are pretty common. The tower-style Macs, often referred to as either cheese graters for the older ones or trash cans for the newer ones, tend to be reserved for the serious professionals, mostly due to their cost. I'd recommend going with a tower if you want a Windows operating system, or either the iMac or Mac Mini for Mac. Laptops should generally only be for those of you who need to make music on the go or DJ live, or if you need a do-everything machine but are perhaps less focused on really intensive music production. That's not to say that laptops aren't powerful enough or can't be spec'd high enough. It's just that to get a high-spec laptop, you're looking at a lot more money than a similarly spec'd desktop. Next up is your budget. Obviously, I can't help you decide on that one. However, what I can say is that your computer is where you should really focus your money to begin with. It's better to have a great computer system and a basic MIDI keyboard, for example, than the other way around. That said, technology improves so rapidly and becomes redundant so quickly that you need to be prepared to either upgrade your system or buy a new one around about every 3 to 5 years. Sadly, computers don't tend to last much longer than that. And even more sadly, there's not that much of a resale value on them either. Bear in mind, you'll also want to set aside some money for a screen or monitor if your computer doesn't come with one, and also for other music production gear such as speakers or headphones, an audio interface, and MIDI keyboard for your basic setup. Okay, here's the big one: Mac versus Windows. Traditionally, Mac was the preferred choice of professional music creators. That's changed a lot in recent years though. Partly from Mac becoming more consumer-focused, and partly from Windows, particularly companies like Steinberg, really upping their game on the Windows side of things. The general consensus, and I'm talking very generally, is that Windows and PCs are cheaper, which they are, and more customizable or rebuildable, which is also true. That said, they're also rumoured to be a lot less reliable and to not stay as fresh or fast for as long as Macs do. On the other hand, Macs are generally said to just work, requiring a lot less fuss to get set up and running, and they tend to be more reliable in the long run. They're damn expensive though. For the same cost as an entry-level Mac, you could probably get an almost top-spec PC, which is definitely something worth thinking about. When I first started music production, Macs were the choice for professionals, so I've always stuck with them. I've had PC systems as our home computers, and I did find them to be less reliable. This was 10 years ago though, and times certainly have changed. Besides customizability, reliability, and cost, you'll also need to know what digital audio workstation, or DAW for short, that you'll be using. Most of the big contenders now work with both Mac and PC, with the exception of Logic Pro X, which is Mac only. So if Logic's your thing, then you're stuck with Mac. And there's no right or wrong choice with DAWs anymore. John Powell uses Logic, but Junkie XL uses Cubase, and there are examples of famous composers and producers for pretty much every single DAW that's out there. Once you've decided on the type, your budget, and preferred operating system, it's time to knuckle down on the actual specs. We're going to talk about the CPU or processor, RAM, and storage. The processor is basically the brains of the operation. This is where you'll focus the most of your budget to begin with. Generally speaking, the processor is one of the more difficult parts of a system to upgrade. In fact, in most systems it's not even possible to, unlike the RAM or storage, which can easily be swapped out, unless it's soldered in like it is in a lot of laptops or mini computers. So the processor gives and receives all of the instructions for the computer. It really is the center of your machine. The clock speed is the rate at which it gets, translates, and gives commands. That's the gigahertz number that's often quoted. With a single core, the higher the clock speed, the faster the processor. But that's not true with multiple cores. You'll have seen most modern processors have dual or quad cores, even right the way up to 32 cores. Loosely speaking, more cores is better than faster clock speeds, as you can essentially spread the workload of your system. And that's something you should learn to do in your audio workstation as well. Most of the software companies have walkthroughs on how to best optimize your DAW for splitting across cores. As I said, technology improves very rapidly, and a lot of the advice out there at the moment is to have an Intel i5 processor at the minimum. And the i7 is said to be optimum. I'd say right now though, the i7 should be your minimum. If you're watching this video in 2 years' time, then it'll be the i9. The RAM is the second priority in your budget, but remember that you can usually upgrade this pretty easily and cheaply yourself. Just be wary of warranty issues and check to make sure the system you're purchasing is definitely upgradable. As I said before, sometimes components are soldered in. Likewise, most systems have a maximum amount of RAM that they can handle as well, so make sure you check that out too. But what is RAM? Well, if you imagine different levels of data that your computer accesses, at the top you have stuff that it's using right now, and that data is generally held in the register of the processor itself. On the next level is stuff the computer needs to be accessed very quickly, and that's stored in the RAM, or random access memory. Anything that doesn't need instant or super quick access is stored in the longer term storage. Some people say that 4 GB is enough for music production. I disagree. I'd say that you need 8 GB as an absolute minimum. 16 GB would be much preferred, even in a fairly basic setup. Particularly if you're working with a lot of sample libraries where samples are essentially stored in the RAM as you're working on projects. So you trailer music composers with your hundreds of tracks and layers of software instruments are going to want to go whole hog and get 64, maybe even 128 GB of RAM. In terms of that bottom layer, the main storage of your system, you have a few choices: hard disks, solid state, or hybrid. A hard disk drive literally has a little spinning disk inside which has data written and read from it, whereas solid state drives have no moving parts and the data is basically stored on a chip, much like a USB thumb or pen drive. Hybrid, unsurprisingly, is a combination of both. Hard drives are better for longer term storage, or at least that's the theory for now, as solid state drives haven't really been around long enough for research to have been done. But hard drives are slower to access files and to run programs. The opposite is true for solid state drives. They're super fast, almost instantaneous when it comes to opening programs, and ultra fast to boot up your system. However, they do tend to be a bit more expensive. You don't really need a massive drive inside your system. In fact, it's actually a lot better to keep things like sample libraries and audio files on secondary or external drives. That said, you do want to make sure you have a decent capacity so that you don't run out of space. Also, think of drives like glasses of water. If there's less water in a glass, it's a lot easier to carry around without spilling than if the glass is full to the brim. Your system will run a lot smoother if your drive isn't absolutely stuffed full. I'd say the ideal setup is to have a small to medium solid state drive in your machine, say 250 to 500 GB, and an external drive for your sample libraries and audio files, at least 1 TB, connected either by USB 3 or Thunderbolt, and then a few external hard disk drives for backing things up on. Seriously, most of the professional composers I know have some pretty crazy systems when it comes to storing and backing up their work on machines. The graphics card and audio cards don't really matter, as you'll be using, or at least you should be using, an external audio interface. Unless, of course, you plan on using the machine for gaming too, in which case you'll want to look into the graphics card options. But I know next to nothing about those, so I can't help you there, sorry. So in conclusion, I'd say the ideal system would be a tower PC for Windows or an iMac or Mac Mini for Mac, a fast multi-core processor such as the Intel i7, an absolute minimum of 8GB of RAM, but realistically more like 16GB to get started, a 500GB solid-state drive along with a second terabyte external drive connected by Thunderbolt or USB 3. If you're very serious about music production, you should opt for a stupidly big processor, like one of the newer 8-core models, and at least 32GB of RAM. Mac are even doing an 18-core iMac now with up to 256GB of RAM, which is crazy. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to the channel. I share music composition and production advice particularly centered around media and soundtrack music. Have a creative day.